Okay, today I'd like to thank you for inviting me for this big meeting. Today I'd like to talk about the pediatric brain tumor. Pediatric brain tumors are a leading cause of cancer-related deaths in children. And in recent years, new technologies of the molecular and genetic analysis have provided biological information, new classification into subgroups with potential clinical implications and treatment. I'd like to demonstrate imaging findings and pathology of various pediatric brain tumors ranging from usual one from very unusual rare tumor and also associated syndrome. Especially, we do diffusion wet imaging routinely, so with an emphasis on diffusion wet imaging. And I'd like to give an overview of molecular biology, genetics, and future target treatment of pediatric brain tumors. And I try to check the PubMed to put the pediatric brain tumor on the magnetic and the pediatric tumor and molecular. They both are increasing recent years, but look at this area. Molecular recently, recent 4 years, kind of increasing greatly. And the crossover here and the magnetic resonance kind of publishment is a little decreased recently. And then this year until April, it's already 73 papers published about molecular biology of the pediatric brain tumor. So it's time to run genetics, molecular biology of the pediatric brain tumor. And I try to show the cases like a case-based presentation. This is a first case, very common case. Pre-diagnosis is pretty easy. High signal intensity on the third portion is high signal with a cystic component, homogeneous enhancing. And the ADC value is very characteristic. ADC value is more than 1.4 or 1.5. Then the diagnosis is a typical pilocytic astrocytoma in the posterior fossa. And this is again a little pitfall because if you look at the MR spectroscopy, choline and lactate peaks increased. But if this is a pontine glioma, this is a bad sign, bad prognosis. But pilocytic astrocytoma case, even lactate choline is increased. That is not related to aggressiveness and prognosis. And this kind of case, pathology shows kind of hyper-moderate cellularity. And the important thing is this area. And like a big soil background is like color is pink, but there is a microcystic component. That very strongly affected the ADC values in this case. And pilocytic astrocytoma, this is the most common pediatric brain tumor, WHO grade 1. And histology, typically packed fibrous tissue mixed with loose microcystic components. And pathologically, eosinophilic granular bodies and the Rosenthal fiber characteristic. However, there's a wide morphologic spectrum, ranged from oligodendroglial-like features to microvascular proliferation. They're also clinically pretty much heterogeneous. But 10 years overall survival rate is very good. But some, we experience some pilocytic astrocytoma pretty aggressive, extending, and even it's rare, but can have malignant transformation. And actually, disseminations seen in 3%. And then this is a little complex slide, but I try to show the underlying molecular biology. And in adult low-grade glioma, is usually display IDH 1, 2, TP53, and 1P90K or something. But this is not usually seen in pilocytic astrocytoma. And pilocytic tumorigenesis of the pilocytic astrocytoma is related to KRAS, RAF, MEK, ERK pathway like this. And this is related to cell growth, proliferation, differentiation, apoptosis. And then 70% of cases in pilocytic astrocytoma are the same genetic abnormalities. We call that the KIAA fusion, like a duplication of BRAF at 7q34 with KIAA fusion. And there are variable genetic abnormalities there too, but this is the most common. And this genetic abnormality is related to cerebellar posterior fossa pilocytic astrocytoma, and the BRAF V600E mutation is located in the kinase domain. That is usually, it's only seen in 99% of PA, but usually non-cerebellar, like hypothalamic PA. And this gene abnormality also often seen pleomorphic xanthosarcoma ganglioma or other low-grade or high-grade tumor in pediatric patient. The interesting thing is neurofibromatosis type 1 case, there's a loss of NF1 gene that affect the KRAS pathway. So then KRAS pathway go to the RAF MEK ELK pathway, the same tumor genesis of pilocytic astrocytoma. So NF1 case, often we can see pilocytic astrocytoma. Why this is important? Because it's not now they don't use treatment, but after growth resection, prognosis is pretty good. But actually, recurrence rate is tinted. Some cases have recurrence, and in that case, you need chemotherapy first, and then the radiation treatment. But a future target treatment, if we use such a special targeting medication, medication, then that can affect, that can be useful for the future treatment. So what do you think about this case? Big tumor in the brainstem, but there is enhancement and some calcification within it. Enhancement is pattern is pretty homogeneous, but most of the part is not much enhancement. And look at the ADC values. ADC values is not really, some part is high, but some part is not really high. Lowest part is 889. And in this case, pathology shows kind of moderate cellularity, but like a fibrous kind of, but then we can see a Rosenthal fiber. What's the diagnosis? So again, this is a pilocytic astrocytoma. Based on the location and the finding, the histology actually, so why ADC value is pretty low in this case? So that this is an exceptional case, but that shows compact fibrillar appearance. Moderate cellularity area can show pretty moderate ADC, reduced ADC in this particular case. There are variable locations and the finding in the PA. First case is optic glioma, typical optic glioma. Second case, hypothalamic pilocytic astrocytoma. And the paper often said this tumor is hypocellular, but actually, if you look at this ADC value is pretty low, pretty high, but cellularity is pretty high, moderate to high. Why ADC value is so high? Because if you look at this, there are clear area, that is microcyst, and also myxoid or extracellular myxoid changes background. That really affect the ADC values. The last case is a pilocytic astrocytoma with a hemorrhage. How about this case? 3-year-old female with accelerated growth, and in the case of neurofibromatosis type 1. There's an enhancement lesion here, and then the tumor extending through the optic tract, but kind of a little aggressive. There's some tumor extending into the subarachnoid space. This was no Rosenthal fiber. This turned to be a pyromyxoid astrocytoma. And the histology corresponds to the pyromyxoid astrocytoma. And then a molecular biology aspect, very similar tumorigenesis pathway in PA and PMA. The only difference, the recent paper said IMP3 is associated shorter progression in free survival in that often seen in PMA rather than PA. And the location, pyrocystic astrocytoma and pyromyxoid astrocytoma, there are many locations. I show some cases of this. Cerebral is the most common, but the brainstem, spinal cord. But the pyromyxoid astrocytoma, we have only 5 cases, but spinocerebellar is a little more common. That is the same as reported in the literature. And about ADC values, the paper said 1.4 or 1.5 is a margin for diagnosis PA from other pediatric brain tumor. But a significant number of cases, sometimes ADC shows intermediate intensity. So need to be careful about this. A pretty wide range of the abnormality. But the pyromyxoid astrocytoma is pretty short, small range of the ADC values. Both high, very high. Okay, I'd like to show another WHO grade 1 tumor. What do you think about this? CJ, 70 years old. This is subependymal giant cell astrocytoma. And the interesting you see, the first presentation shows mTOR complex signal abnormality. That's usually seen in the tuberous sclerosis, and that also that is related to tumor genesis of the SEGA. So this is tuberous sclerosis, inhibit the mTOR pathway. And imaging manifestation, I didn't know that, but the ependymoma also can seen in the tuberous sclerosis. Is that right? And next topic is malignant transformation from low-grade gliomas. And there are many papers about this. And there are many different genes related to the malignant transformation. And but the future target treatments now BRAF V600E abnormality that is seen 60 to 20%, 25% of low-grade glioma, pediatric low-grade glioma. Now, about high-grade glioma, this is also pretty common, but again, gene abnormality mutation is different from low-grade astrocytoma, and then ACVR, this is actually bone morphogenic protein, that is usually seen pontine glioma. So considering those histone receptor mutations, EZH2 inhibitors, probably in the future treatment, can be used, future treatment. So this case is a small enhancing lesion in the temporal lobe with surrounding edema. But after rejection treatment, I think several years later, the tumor occurred, and that was GBM. So, and also there was a dissemination. This is an example of GBM transformed from ganglioglioma. It's a pretty rare case. But there is about 15 cases report about this. And that interesting, that is tumorigenesis is related to MEK pathway. Other pathway that usually seen in adult is not seen somehow. And this case is a pretty typical case of pontine glioma. And the ADC value in this case is pretty high. So we thought this is low-grade astrocytoma. Brainstem glioma, it's pretty common, 12.5% between age 0 to 14. And WHO could be grade 2 to 4. And despite histopathology, so median survival rate is very short. Even low-grade astrocytoma, like the previous case, the survival rate is very low. And molecular biology is related to H3 mutation, TP53, ACVR, and PFGFRA, something. And the important thing is if there is a diffusion restricted area or enhancement area on MRI, that should be the target of the biopsy because there should be an anaplasia focus of that area. So recently, a lot of institutions, they try to do stereotactic biopsy. That is pretty safe to identify the molecular gene abnormalities. That will be useful for future treatment and the clinical trials. Now, there are 22 open clinical trials. There are many trials like those. And this case is exactly that case. And there is a little low signal intensity area on T2, and then enhancement there, and diffusion actually restricted in this area. And then we try to biopsy exactly this area, and turn to be is GBM, very high-grade foci there. And then the treatment was, they tried to several clinical trials, but patient still alive. But still, the tumor is progressing now. And there are 4 subgroups of the Pontin glioma. I show low-grade astrocytoma and GBM case. All not good. For example, here, survival rate is 0.88 years, even low-grade astrocytoma. How about this case? This is a twin case. Both twin have about 10 years old, have irregular enhancing mass in the frontal lobe, but opposite side. So this is glioblastoma with neurofibromatosis type 1. So it's rare, but sometimes de novo glioblastoma can occur in the in one case. And based on the literature, they suggest different pathway as a tumorigenesis of this kind of GBM. And probably, if pathway use this pathway, then pilocytic or pyromyxoid astrocytoma occur, but different pathway then may cause more malignant tumor. What about this case? This is only 2 months old. Huge heterogeneous mass that is heterogeneously enhancing, and the pathology like consistent with GBM, right? This was congenital GBM. The congenital GBM is very rare, only 50 cases reported, but 5% of congenital brain tumor, but congenital brain tumor is less than 2% of all pediatric brain tumor. Usually located supratentorially, large tumor with hemorrhage and intraventricular extension. Differential diagnosis, choroidal plexus papilloma, carcinoma, peanut teratoma. And it looks like a different tumorigenesis pathway. They said P53 hypoxia pathway, I don't know. But that's different from either pediatric GBM or adult GBM. And prognosis was thought to be poor before, but actually, if subtotal resection and the appropriate chemotherapy, the prognosis is a little bit better than pediatric or adult GBM. And those cases are example of a choroidal plexus tumor. First case is a choroidal plexus papilloma young patient, where exactly papillary appearance, pathology and the imaging is exactly similar. And the second one is atypical choroidal plexus, WHO or grade 2. And this partly you can see a papillary projection, but some disappeared. And that case, we saw the recurrence after 2 years. And this case was choroidal plexus carcinoma, pretty hypercellular, no papillary pattern anymore, and a very hypercellular tumor. And this is adult case of papillary choroid plexus papilloma, a typical papilloma. And again, we can see some papillary pattern here, and some areas not well seen. So this is a kind of pattern of papilloma or papillary choroid plexus carcinoma. And then WHO classification, grade 1 to 3, I already showed that. But also based on the molecular classifications, based on the methylation profiling. And they divided by 3 clusters. One is pediatric, low-grade case. And then second one is adult case, like this case, low risk. And then high-risk choroid plexus tumors. So there are sub-classifications recently. And then, so we should know one thing, choroid plexus papilloma can be related to Li-Fraumeni syndrome. That is pretty famous things. And the Li-Fraumeni syndrome, there are many kind of tumor can occur because of the tumor protein, the p53 abnormalities. How about this case? 7-month-old male, multiple episodes of seizures. They are heterogeneous, intensely enhancing mass in the temporal lobe, but some area is not much enhancing. And some cystic component within it, probably, like this component. And I think tumor is a kind of leptomeningeal or meningeal base. And some area ADC is like ISO intense, some area is high. And neuropathology shows desmoplastic elongated cell component and a cellular component. And the MIB is less than 2%. So what's the diagnosis? This is desmoplastic infantile ganglioma. It's pretty rare, 0.5% of pediatric brain tumor. And the imaging is very characteristic. Meningocerebral neuroepithelial tumor, so always attached to the meninges, like this. And even it appears bad tumor, but actually WHO classification is just grade 1. But however, 40% probably needs more medical radiation treatment and or even surgical added surgical intervention. And 50% can help leptomeningeal spread. So maybe in the future need more less side effect medication for this tumor. How about this case? This case is anaplastic ependymoma. And the histology shows a typical perivascular rosette. This is another anaplastic ependymoma, and the ADC value is pretty low. The last case also ADC value is, some area is low. And the ependymoma is a third most common tumor, 8 to 10%, and 70% is in the posterior fossa. And the diffusion restriction is 70% in anaplastic, but even grade 2, 50% shows a reduced ADC area. And then molecular abnormality is different in the location too. Supratentorial area, this fusion often seen. And even infratentorial ependymoma classified into 2 subgroups, group A and group B. And group A is related to this abnormality and more aggressive, occur in young children. So then probably EZH2 inhibitor can be useful for future treatment. And next one, the medulloblastoma. Medulloblastoma is very complex. There are 4 subtypes. WNT, SHH, group 3 and group 4. And second common type, tumor. And so first one is another primarily that is consistent with classic medulloblastoma. And the second one, SHH abnormality, is related to desmoplastic and nodular medulloblastoma. And large cell and anaplastic LCA medulloblastoma is mainly seen in group C and group D. And group C is the worst prognosis. And there are many different, so this question is based on the difference in genetics and the gene expression. And imaging-wise, diffusion, if there's an increased ADC in the tumor, that suggests bad sign, because that represents usually necrosis. Enhancement, necrosis is bad sign. And future treatment is based on the genetic abnormalities that could be in clinical trials now. And the location is very helpful to identify those subtypes. The classical type, midline, caudal part is more common. And SHH1 is actually more located hemisphere, and upper area can often involved. And group 3, group 4 is similar, but the lower part, caudal part, is more involved. And the age distribution also different in all subgroups. How about this case? Not much enhancement, very well-defined tumor in the caudal area of the cerebellum. And in this case, there is a biopsy of the actually small colon resection that shows adenomatous dysplasia. So this is pretty rare, but this case is a medulloblastoma classic type with Turcot syndrome. And Turcot syndrome is a histological name, CNS tumor and polyps, characterized by polyps. And gene mutation already knew that, and that is included Wnt WNT signal pathway. So that's supposed to be classic medulloblastoma. This is another example of classic type. What I want to show is ADC value is pretty low in the classic type. Next case is a desmoplastic type, but that is seen, that was related to glutaric aciduria type 1, like this abnormalities. So desmoplastic variant can be seen associated with some types of leukodystrophy too. And this case is a very rare case, very strange findings, right? Like a linear, nodular enhancement, and bone also abnormal. There's some bone cyst here. This is medulloblastoma, extensive nodularity, MBEN. And this case is actually Gorlin syndrome. The Gorlin syndrome is characterized by SHH gene abnormality. So then desmoplastic medulloblastoma occur in the Gorlin syndrome. So this is the last case of the medulloblastoma. This is an anaplastic medulloblastoma. So look at this ADC values. ADC is pretty high, right? And heterogeneously enhancing. That's one of the characteristics of bad sign, and the extending lower part, and involving the brain stem. That's another characteristic of bad medulloblastoma. How about this case? There's some hemorrhage in it, intensely enhancing heterogeneous, and some areas ADC low. This is a ATRT, and then this hemorrhage central cystic components can be characteristic for ATRT. And then this case is PNET, ADC again low, and very well defined. And then there are 3 subtypes of the based on the molecular abnormalities. That information can be useful for new therapies in the future. And this is a very rare case, temporal diffusion abnormality. And ADC is decreased, very well defined, like PNET. But histologically, this was ETMR. So ETMR is coined by the guys in 2010, and the grade 4 tumor, and this tumor include ependymoma, ETANTR, and medulloblastoma. And the supratentorial 70%, infratentorial 30%. And there are, again, special gene abnormality in this case. And this is another rare tumor, RGNT. But solid portion is not diffusion much restricted, but cystic portion that shows restricted diffusion. That's very related to hemorrhage. T1 shows eye signal, gradient shows ring enhancement. So hemorrhage is one of the characteristics, and other things are satellite lesion like this. Histologically, we can see neurocytic rosettes like this. And also, special gene abnormalities reported in RGNT. And this is germ cell tumor, teratoma. Then we can see, this case we can see fat signal, so it's easy to diagnose. But sometimes pineal tumor is very difficult to diagnose. That is germ cell tumor or non-germ cell. Then stereotactic biopsy is important, but the tissue is not like corrupted. Then special immunological study examination or gene molecular analysis is very important for the diagnosis. I haven't had much time, but this case is a 4-year-old boy with a headache. What I think, ADC bar is pretty low, hypercellularity, but pretty similar to previous case. Okay? But age is a little different. This is a pineoblastoma. Pineoblastoma also suggested almost all tumor, pediatric tumor, they already found some gene abnormality. Actually, that's surprising. And this case is a very rare pineal lesion tumor. That was PTPR. This is kind of characterized by presence of cystic component and the hemorrhage. But again, it's very similar to other tumor. The papillary projection of hypercellular component with hemorrhage is characteristic. And then they already knew some gene abnormalities in this case too. I think this is the last case. I just show craniopharyngioma, but adamantinomatous here in children and adult case here. Why I show those cases? Because again, there is 2 subtypes based on genetic alterations. So usually BRAF V600E, again, this usually seen in papillary tumor, papillary craniopharyngioma, but not detectable in adamantinomatous type. And the other mutation seen in adamantinomatous progress. Okay, I think this is meningioma. I don't have enough time, so I direct to show meningioma and schwannoma. This case on neurotumor type 2, kind of different gene abnormalities, and I try to show ataxia telangiectasia with meningioma. Again, different mutation here. Okay, summary. This lecture demonstrates imaging finding pathologies and associated genetic syndrome, various pediatric brain tumors, and provided an overview of the molecular biology, genetics, and future target treatment. So radiologists should know these points because they are important, not only for accurate diagnosis, but also for understanding pathogenesis, clinical relevant classifications, patient's management and treatment, and probably guiding future imaging research of pediatric brain tumor. Thank you for attention.